Um, Looking at proven sustainable, proven free, what what is the background that you bring to this work that has proven sustainable and proven free that allowed you to get here?
Great question.
What's the background?
Yeah. Well, when I think about sustainability in my own personal life, this is a project that I believe really began 50 years ago. Um, when I was in college, and in particular, when I met three elders, women mentors, and mentors who were steady with me throughout their entire lives. They're all transitioned now, but they're still with me in a strong way. I'm going to call their names, and that's Gloria Joseph, Jim Copland, Joan Cassidy. I mentioned them on the website, sustainable.org, and the personal path. But when I was in college, they each, as educators and teachers, helped me understand that part of my mission in this world was to listen deeply to people who have been in place for a while, working it out, what it means to be alive and vital in the world. And that listening, deep listening for me when I was 19, 20 years old, led me eventually to do my student teaching work at Taos Pueblo, which is arguably the longest standing residence of human beings on Turtle Island that we know of. That is, it goes back as a place, the Pueblo itself, where people have lived for well more than 500 years, living in this place. And so when I was 21 years old, doing my student teaching there at Taos, I was infused with the experience of being among people who had sustained before contact, before empire, before attacks from the outside and across the big water, and people who were still in the 1970s when I was there, finding a way to survive. At that time, the Nixon administration. And one of the marks of that survivance was that they filed a suit to have their most sacred site, Blue Lake, returned to them rather than be developed into a ski resort. And just before I arrived in Taos, they got word that the Supreme Court ordered the return of sacred Blue Lake to the Taos, one of the rare genuine victories. And so my experience as a young man on this place was profoundly moving. One day, one of my teachers there, Cressida Archuleta, who was born on the Pueblo, Taosena, asked me if I wanted to go riding on the Pueblo. And I was really nervous about my actual physical presence on the Pueblo. I didn't want to go places that I shouldn't be. And so I was cautious about it, but she assured me that it would be fine for me to come. And so I went 5 miles an hour in my old Chevy Impala to her house on the Pueblo. And her husband, Max, who was a chief of the house, had spent the morning out looking for the horse, which was grazing out in the common pasture. And I was, when I discovered this, I was kind of abashed. I thought, oh, I don't want these people going out of their way to do this for me, right? But Cressida assured me that this was fine. This is required. So we met Max. He had the horse. He said, here's your horse. You want a saddle? And I kind of said, oh, well, I maybe I don't need one. And he laughed out loud. He said, of course, we're going to give you a saddle. Yeah, you need a saddle, boy. So he put a saddle on the horse. And he said, have at it. And I said, you know, I can go anywhere. He said, you go anywhere you want. So I had done enough prior research to realize that there was an ancient path that led from the Pueblo itself up to the sacred Blue Lake. And this was one of the genuine ancient paths on Turtle Island that we know of. And I remember that day riding on this horse, beautiful spring day, May 1974, and just thinking, here I am in this place that has so many footsteps beneath me. And while I was riding up the trail, a bunch of young, early teens men came running out of the bush and saw me and were kind of stunned for a minute and ran back into the bush. And I realized that these were young men who had been out of school for a particular period of time to live with the elders in the kivas, learning what was needed to understand what it would mean to be an adult man on Taos Pueblo. And they weren't used to seeing white guys riding horses up their main thoroughfare. I made my way finally back. Well, I didn't make my way. The horse knew how to get me home. I just let him go. He took me back. And there's something in that story that just says, you're supposed to be on this road, stay on it. And my continued relationship then with those elders in particular, Gloria, Jim, and Joan, helped me stay on that road.
The kind of mythic story that is informs this next question. How does whiteness, your whiteness, inform the work of Proven Sustainable, Proven Free, given your mythic experience at Taos and with the three elders that you mentioned?
Well, in different ways, each of those elders really challenged me and supported me and encouraged me to begin to recognize myself as a white man, as a man of European descent in a white supremacist patriarchal culture and context. I didn't have those words or awareness or questions in my consciousness, really, in deep ways, until I met them. I actually did have some of the questions in my consciousness, but I did not have any idea about what pathways I could follow to begin to uncover the complexities of what it means for me to be descended from white settler colonialists, and some of them very fierce um, segregationists, enslavers. My great great grandfather was editor of the Knoxville newspaper during the Civil War, writing editorials in support of the Confederacy. Family story is that when he died many years later in Colorado, in a veteran's home, he asked that his gravestone face south. All the gravestones in that cemetery were facing north.
Hmm.
So, so partly my answer to your question is I had to uncover my own personal family history, including Jacob Austin Sperry, the man I just named, his history, but then also the history of my great great grandparents on the other side who left Germany as Lutheran war resistors prior to the Civil War to escape the Prussian draft, met on the boat and married. This is my grandmother Hazel Hahn's parents, Louise and Lincoln Lindstruth. And when they came to the US in the 1840s and 50s as farmers in upstate, what we know as upstate New York now, when the Civil War started, one of these resistors, my great great grandfather, was drafted into the Union Army. And he must have, something must have taken him from that because he named his son Lincoln Grant Hahn after the
Hmm.
presidents, Lincoln and Grant. And my brother, who you know, Lincoln, is named after him. I don't want to make too much of these stories because I don't know that much about them, but in response to your question, Ketu, and it goes to identity counts that we'll talk about down the line for you.
Mm-hmm.
Identity does count. Um, on the broadest levels, how am I related to the breadth of human family across time and planet, which is what proven sustainable for me is in part an expression of that relation. But it's also very much about what it means to be a white man in what we call the United States now, dealing with issues of white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism that have founded this current moment.
Good answer. My last question, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey. My last question has to do with the human side of proven sustainable, proven free. The so much of the material that these people who have lived on the land for 500 and 150 years in their respective pursuits of their identity, um, those those pursuits have both a material and a quote unquote spiritual or conscious presence. In your relationships with the people who you have communicated with thus far, how has the spiritual side of your consciousness intersected their realities?
As I spent the last year finding these words from these peoples and the individuals representing their peoples, the phrase web of connection is coming back, because as I see this, the assemblies of people who are represented within Proven Sustainable, Proven Free, I recognize deep webs of connection. These are webs of connection in some of the common themes I understand. I spent a little bit of time after Kelsey had found the way to do searches by word or theme, looking at some of the common themes. And the words that I put in that had the most returns from lots of different people were this set: spirit. You put the word spirit in, you're going to get a lot of returns, because people are referencing spirit. Ancestor, knowledge, language, and place. Spirit, ancestor, knowledge, language, place.
Language and place.
So for me, I recognize now myself as one node in this web of connection. And for me, placing myself in a way that I can identify as a part of my own identity, this is a deeply spiritual awareness, in the sense that it's tying me on the spirit plane more than on the material plane. And when I communicate with the individuals, when I send the letters out, which I have to the 70% of the 176 people that I was able to find addresses for, just that process of writing a letter, dear, and folding it up and putting it in a mail with a stamp on it, not knowing if it'll ever get there, that itself has been kind of a sacred process for me. And I've done it 3 different times. I did the first set for Proven Enduring Resilient, #1, then for Proven Free Resistant, #2, and then Proven Resilient and Enduring #2. So 3 different sets. And each time when I took those stacks to the post office and opened the box, I felt like I was, they weren't just material messages, they were spirit messages. And some of them, and they've all come back in one way or the other, sometimes with, insufficient address, and sometimes with an unexpected email. Thank you for your questions, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Kelsey.
Yes, this is a very enriching conversation already, and I love the stories that you're sharing, and just also paying attention to, right, even the pace of this conversation so far, and how you're taking the time to really, go into some of the details and the intricacies of the horseback ride and of your family heritage, and illustrating different ways that spirit has arose throughout this project. I think it's really beautiful and speaks to this project and the collective of kind of creating those opportunities for people to ideally slow down a little bit, really deeply engage with the materials you've curated, and the messages in the larger mission of meaningful connection and intentional efforts to preserve and learn from those, different knowledges that have survived so many years. And my question goes actually to that word I just used around knowledge. And we were speaking about different identities and your white male identity, but I wanted to create the opportunity for you to speak a little bit more about your identity as an educator and how that plays into the purpose, design, and kind of intended use of the Proven Sustainable project and initiative.
It's great to be participating in a conversation with two people that I have known for a long time. Kelsey, you and I 10 years, Ketu, you and I 35 years, but who also know me and my history. There is something about the power of shared history. And I have become me through knowing both of you in deep, deep ways. So what's this got to do with me as an educator? To be honest, I think initially when I started thinking about putting together this website, I had the thought that it would be useful for educators like myself to be able to share deepened awareness and experience and invite deepened questions from students, much as I did when I first began my teaching career 47 years ago in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the Learning Center, a wonderful parent-teacher cooperative elementary school with about 30 kids. This would have been a helpful resource at the time. But as I moved into the project, I realized that, in fact, that goal to have, as an educator, a resource that would be useful for non-indigenous educators like myself, was actually third in a list of three intended purposes. The first being to help support peoples of the earth, First Nations peoples, indigenous peoples, peoples in resistance and resilience throughout the globe to support and connect with one another. And that's a different intention. It's important for me to say that this kind of interchange, this web of connection, has been going on forever for these peoples. And I'm talking about before European contact. You listen deeply to folks, they've been in contact on all sorts of levels for a long, long time. And so this is just one more effort to sort of say, let's strengthen the bridges of connection. And if this project can help support any of the people that are represented to connect with another individual or group they didn't know about or had lost contact with, that's great. Secondly, and importantly to your question, Kelsey, I have worked with many young people over the years as an educator who have had their identities erased, stolen, or lost. And this erasure, stealing, and losing was really an intentional aspect of nation state building, settler colonialism. They, for the most part, when those projects are undertaken, they wanted to help erase the historic memory. But they weren't successful. I'm talking about the empires now. And I don't just mean in the Western hemisphere, I'm talking about throughout the entire world. And so there are young people who recognize they have a connection to these peoples and others that aren't referenced on the site, but they don't know much about them because they're living in a culture that's pretty effectively, I think whitewash is a good term, those histories. And so this is an invitation and an opportunity for young people who are surfing the web. I'm a surfer, so I like that term, who can then say, oh, this is a way for me to connect with my Haitian heritage, my Tanzanian Hadzabe heritage, my Sami heritage, my Inuit heritage, my Hawaiian heritage, my Maori heritage, on, and or heritages that aren't represented within the site. So, as you can tell, I can go on and on, but I'll stop there.
No, it's very great. I think you started to discuss something, I mean, about your intentions for the site, and also referenced the hopes of the interweb of connection and the efforts. I wanted you to speak a little bit more directly then to this specific initiative, this conversation now that we're hoping to be the first of many, or at least a few to come, and kind of speak, I guess, more to, yes, this, your thoughts and intention around the peoples that you have incorporated and how they're represented on the site, and your hopes for conversations moving forward facilitated in a way, like your thoughts around how you're hoping that facilitation and efforts will go.
Well, I know that these conversations will continue, and I absolutely trust that they will continue in a way that will be consistent with my intentions because of my relationships with the two of you, which will be a good segue into inviting you two into this conversation. Because you both, I recognize in each of you a particular deep connection to the intentions, plural, within this project, proven sustainable, proven free. And so what I see going forward is now an opportunity to actualize these relationships that initiated by individual personal research online, then became concrete when I was given the commission by 4 of my brothers, Ketu, Willie, Chris, and Lincoln, to make a good faith effort to connect with each of the people I'm representing. And that's where those letters came from as a commission I was given. And some of those letters actually got through. And some of the people who received them were able to then miraculously get back to me. So we have a handful of people who have already said, I'm in. I want to be engaged. How can I participate? And so those are the folks that we're starting with. And it's a relatively small number, which is actually probably good initially. And my hope is that as you two facilitate future conversations, that other people and names will come up. The folks will say, oh, you got to talk to so-and-so. You know this person? And then we will, as an underground, genuine grassroots network suggests, the roots will spread beneath the soil, and they will be coming up with the two of you helping to support those. That's my goal. And it ties to Ketu's question about spirit connection, because it really does all start to and come back to relationship, where I began my relationships with those three elders, my relationships with you two, and now beginning relationships, genuine relationships with individuals who I can name, who I hope will be a part of these conversations going forward. I thank you both for your thoughtful, deep, moving questions to me. It's helped shape my awareness. So I don't know who wants to go next, but I'm going to pass it on to somebody else. I talked enough.
We're right on schedule, right on schedule. So that's good. So,
Good.
Kelsey, you want to go next, or?
You want me to respond to questions or ask them of you? I think it would
Ask.
ask. Okay. Yes. I think it would be helpful, and we've just met a few times, and for the audience tuning into this, to better understand Sox reference that you've known each other for over 30 years. But I was wondering if you could begin by speaking a little bit to your relation with Sox and how that has brought you to this specific collaborative.
Wow. 35 years is just about half of my life. So I've known Sox for a period, and we've had a relationship that has lasted longer than most of the relationships that I've had in my life. I met Sox back during a time when I understood that revolution meant a frontal assault on the empire, that assault was one that had to unfold in one's personal life, and that assault had violence at its core. Sox challenged me to take another look at the whole sphere of violence as it had unfolded in my past life, but as it was unfolding in my political life and my understanding of the role that I needed to play in the world that I was living in, particularly here in Fort Wayne. His challenge wasn't a frontal assault. It was an ability to open up questions for me, to question the assumptions that I was moving upon and the information that I had, and how I had translated and interpreted that information. Working with him over a period of years and getting to know him at a personal level as a white man with consciousness, and with a consciousness that wasn't a neoliberal consciousness, a consciousness that was based in spirit that was very thoughtful, but was beyond intellect. Um, that allowed me to really question myself at those levels. Who are you? What is your identity? Um, who are your people? Um, what does it mean to be human? Those questions and those concerns are foremost in my relationship with Sox, um, and in our unfolding, our unfolding as folks in our middle years to folks in our latter years, and seeing how we have both grown as a result of our relationship, and how we have brought that growth to one another as a body of enrichment. Um, when I reference Socks as my brother, um, I'm talking about at a spiritual level. I'm talking about at a level of breathing and at a level of consciousness, at a level of thinking that's beyond intellectual masturbation. Um, and so to be invited into this work, to be included in the questions as to whether this work should go forward, and then to be invited into the work is a deep honor and a deep recognition. It's a recognition of my own humanity and of the humanity that's asking me to participate. And so um, this is a process of deepening for me. Um, and I look at it in relationship to everything else that's going on in my life right now. Um, the reading that I'm doing and the meditation that I'm doing. Um, it's all a common fabric, and proven sustainable, proven free at the educational material level just really speaks to spirit as foundation. Um, um, for me, I look out the window and I'm seeing the trees, and I know that I'm one with the trees. I know that. It's not something that I think, it's something that I know. I see raindrops on my window pane, and I know I'm part of that. And that's the level of consciousness that I see present in proven sustainable, proven free. So that my approach to this work is a spiritual one. And I say spiritual in with the understanding of consciousness being the root of our spirituality.
Thank you.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that answered your
Oh,
question, but
yes. No, it did and beyond, for sure. I think really, really built upon what Sachs was speaking about earlier around one of the core foundations of this work being and in your livelihoods overall, right? Of sincere connection, relation, spirit, and a deeper knowing and understanding that goes beyond just the cognizant level to really embodied deep knowing and collaborative efforts. Um, wow, yes, so much that you have shared. So to build off of that, um, do you want to speak to, I think, drawing on this essence of spirit and human connection and connection to both others, spirituality, and and place environment, how you see that really unfolding and the importance of the work specifically within the container of the proven sustainability project and initiative that Sox has spearheaded.
We are living in a time when the vitality of the information that we receive is so critically important to how we go forward as a species. Proven sustainable, proven free, for me, helps me to communicate with people that have no grounding in history, have very little political understanding, but are totally tied up in consumerism and capitalism. Helps me to communicate with them in a way that depersonalizes the conversation for me. Most of the people who I'm speaking with on a daily basis are speaking from their personhood. Their only point of reference is their emotions. Proven sustainable, proven free is a pivot point that I can make in conversations with people, directing them to a place where they can see the contours, the possible contours of their emotional life. I have to jump backward here. I began this journey into consciousness from a deep hole, a deep well. It wasn't a hole, it was a well, a deep well of understanding where there was a rich body of water. And I was neck deep in it. That well was death row. Death row allowed me to depersonalize my experience. That experience that was so overwhelmingly personal because I had been accused of something that I didn't do and sentenced to die for it. The shock of that and the shame that registered in the family that I came from forced me to go beyond my emotion. It forced me to take a look at what was really operating within this body and how did I get into that position. What I found was a body of relationships that came to me not out of my memory, because I have a terrible memory. I can't remember what happened 2 minutes ago. It allowed me to tap into my genetic memory. It allowed me to access my intellect in a way that inspirited it. I read and I read and I read. And everything I read informed something deep within me that helped me to identify myself. So that 2.5 years into a 5-year term on death row, I could identify myself as a person of African descent in an empire whose whole intent was to erase me. understanding that as a founding identity, a founding conscious identity, and founding spiritual identity allowed me to 2.5 years later walk off of death row a whole human being, somebody who could see the value in other people, something that I hadn't really considered intellectually on a thinking level before I went to prison, something that was somatic within me, something that I knew, but I could not articulate. That experience in prison helped me to become a human being that was able to communicate with other human beings. The finding of my intellectual and spiritual, my metaphysical identity, my identity as my material identity as an African in America, my gender identity as a black man in a society that was trying to eliminate him. All of that informs informs this work that I'm engaged in now. What I came out of that, what I emerged from that understanding is that, as Garvey said, one God, one aim, one destiny. That there's a oneness, there is a unifying principle in life. And it's that unifying principle that drives me forward. It's how I understand myself. I articulate it through a cultural lens. I can articulate it through a cultural lens, through a political lens, through an educational lens, an academic. I can articulate it in many different ways. But central to my understanding of what it means to be a human being, for what it means for me to be in relationship with other people, is that we all operate from this unifying principle. We all operate from this thing that we call life. And none of us has the intelligence to really say what it is. And when we can say that we do not know, we open ourselves up to be in relationship with one another. And so this project is a project about relationships. It's about building relationships, and it's about extending relationships that we have been brought into from an ancestral plane. The ancestors are here working, and they are working overtime at this point to help us find our way. And proven sustainable, proven free is one of the channels that can be used to help people to find their identity, their true identity, not just their material and personal identity in the world.
Kelsey,
Thank
if you
you.
don't mind, I'd like to jump in there because
Yes, yes.
Ketu just you just touched on the word that I really want to ask you to help us decode a little bit. Um, and by decoding, I mean to go deep into it, not to think about it, but to go deep into the multiple meanings, including the sensate, the mythic, the intuitive, as well as the rational, and all the ones I haven't named. Many years ago, I was first introduced to the concept of identity counts as a name that you had given to a central, I'll call it a vision quest of yours that you were inviting others of us to join you on. And I realized that in the current world, the digital world in particular, and this ties to some of the stuff I want to ask Kelsey about down the line. For many people, I think identity becomes associated with my Twitter hashtag, my Facebook account, my Instagram, you know, the way that I get branded online and seen and known. This becomes my identity. And when I hear you talking about identity in the way that you just have, and the way that I know you for many, many years, it's a very different understanding of what identity means than that, what I just described, the sort of mass marketed digital understanding. I know you as a poet. One of the ways that I know you in many ways is as a poet, a griot, a word sound jazz man. And so I think you encourage me to sort of stretch my own understanding of language. So I'm thinking about we-dentity in addition to identity. And I went back to one of the first identity counts publications that I have you put together on the Middle Passage as an educator. And you quote Mamadi Keita, who refers to traditional rhythms. I think I'll just read the quote from Keita that you begin that publication with. The traditional rhythms represent how we think and live. Without the traditional rhythms, our history would not exist. How is genetic memory referenced, and Keita's idea of traditional rhythms, how were those tied to identity that steps outside the personhood?
Good question. When I talk about identity, I'm talking about rhythm. I'm talking about the space between the words that informs the conversation. I'm talking about that unifying principle that allows me to intuit with other people. Rhythm is simply the movement of sound through space and time as this particular life form that we are. We have moved through space and time from a particular rhythm that has allowed us to be here in the particular form that we are, in the material form that we are. All of us didn't create this form, but all of us are subject to the form. We are attached to the form. The digital world is a manifestation of the form. We are hypnotized by the form. When I talk about identity, I'm not talking about the form. I'm not talking about the empire. I have no identity with the empire. My identity is beyond the empire. The empire exists within my identity, my unified identity. as a poet, I understand that it is my responsibility with language to tap into the primal rhythm that we have as human beings so that I can communicate with you. Because if I am forced to communicate with you through the form, the only thing that can show up is violence. Nothing else is possible. So I must go beyond the form, beyond the empire, beyond the digitization of communication to spirit, what we call spirit. What we call spirit is simply consciousness. And we understand consciousness by how it manifests in these bodies that we live in, that we inhabit. And we can intelligently call upon these bodies when we understand that it's the sensations that arise within these bodies that tell us who we are and where we are and what time it is. And so we have to pay attention to the sensations. We have to be we have to be conscious of the sensate world that we live in so that we can interpret it in a way that allows us to live nonviolently, harmoniously, collaboratively, and collectively. If we don't do that, then the only thing that can happen is that we reproduce the form that exists. We reproduce the war. We have been at war. We have been at war since the first empires. Educators glorify, raise up these empires from Kemet, Egypt, and Babylon, Sumeria, Greece, and Rome. These empires we raise up, but always in these empires there has been a resistant strain, a strain saying, this is not the way. We are simply the ongoing development of that. Proven sustainable, proven free is the extension of that, all the way back to the beginning. We, we aren't doing anything new. We're doing what we're supposed to do.
Wow. Well, with your permission, both of you, I want to move to Kelsey.
Yes.
Because, and I love the organic nature of this conversation. Um, it just seems that's a word, Ketu, you and I use a lot when we talk with one another. There is
Mm-hmm.
a organic, a flow. And I wrote down, you said we are hypnotized by the form. We are hypnotized by the form. Um, and I took that to mean also hypnotized and shackled by the
Mm-hmm.
form. There's a kind of enslavement when
Yes.
one um, commits oneself to particular ways of knowing and saying in the world. Kelsey, I want to say I spent a bunch of time yesterday on your wonderful website, um, and one of the things you lead with um, is is the sense of wanting to support people to find, to recover, to claim sustained peace, presence, and power.
Mm.
I really like that phrase, sustained peace, presence, and power. it's a really nice articulation to me of what proven sustainable, proven free is about. Peoples who have made it a point in their identity, we-identity, in their rhythms to sustain peace, presence, and power. So I'm curious, Kelsey, in what ways the work that you've done to bring proven sustainable into the world ties with your intention as an educator through your work with people, particularly around dehypnotizing, unshackling from the form. How are they connected? It's a big question.
Yeah, so thank you. And yeah, this conversation continues to be very thought-provoking, which ties to my response that I think, you have been an incredible leading example for me of someone, as Ketu is speaking about, really helps individuals such as myself expand their awareness of their unknown beliefs that are driving their actions and ways of being and perception of the world, and increase their awareness of the systems that they're a part of, and perhaps blindly supporting and continuing. And I think proven sustainable, logically, since it is a result and extension of your work and knowledge and passions, that the project as a whole, the way in which it's been designed and presented, does that as well, and that it really raises individuals' awareness through diverse perspectives, inquiry, invitations for conversation, relationship building. And this tying back to the statement you extracted from my site around helping people sustain their peace, presence, and power, particularly amidst our increasingly digitized lives. I really love that all of the collaborative efforts that I've taken part in with you, including this, have encouraged people to expand and question the use of words that are so common in our dialogue. And I know this even just goes back to what Ketu is speaking and his identity as a poet, of really thinking more deeply, and at that, even just body essence knowing of what are the words that we choose to use, and how can we reclaim how we want to use them, or start dialogue about how we can evolve and shift certain texts. And I think, around just proven sustainability, like sustainable can be often caught up or used, particularly in capitalistic notions, in a very rather narrow framing of a certain environmental lens. So I think an amazing thing about this project is that it's expanding what it means to be sustainable, and just actually asking people to contribute to that conversation of what it means for them, and what it can mean for them. And each of the words that you brought up from my messaging, I really want to just open that awareness and conversation as well, of what does it mean? What are your current uses and ways of embodying peace, presence, and power? How are those part of systems that you are taking part in? And how can you and we collectively reflect on those and shift them to be more aligned with a livelihood and future and a collective kind of existence that we want to move forward with? Particularly the word power, right? And you've been instrumental in raising my awareness about that and drawing on Paulo Freire's work and the pedagogy of the oppressed and these cycles of power, and how power can be seen in a negative light, or it can be believed to just be this grandeur kind of word, and assume, again, going back to what Ketu was saying of kind of implicit violence, of that you need violence to uphold power, or you need oppression and certain erasure or neglect, and really looking at peoples and models and individuals who have exemplified other ways of being able to claim power through peace and more grounded, empathetic, inquiry-driven presence, is the type of work that I'm really excited about and passionate about, and really strongly aligns with this conversation, initiative, and collective overall.
Kelsey, when you put your mind to the word power, how does power manifest in your life?
Yeah, that's a great personal human question, which is great part of these conversations, right? I think, I mean, going back to some of the discussions we've had around identity, right, and systems, and being aware of multiple identities that I hold as someone that has certain implicit powers through being white, middle class, American. I'm living abroad right now, so a very aware, English speaking, like those are certain identities of mine that I've learned give me an unquestioned power most of my life. And, you know, especially starting with my relation and experience with Sox and some of our formative work, starting to uncover a deeper awareness of that, and the responsibility of being aware and intentionally engaging in exploring what that means, and on how to try to use that power for good, or for, again, just more collective consciousness and conversations. One identity, like, I did not include necessarily in that was like around notions of being female, is one that in my life, being female and age are two particular identities, actually, and it's interesting, within this group specifically too, as outliers, of a younger female, that I have experienced a little bit more of that loss of power at times, or perceived to have a heightened consciousness of, this is a space that I don't as comfortably claim power, or I'm being raised to be aware that others feel more comfortable in power in this space, and how do I recognize that and move forward with that. And again, all of this so far, my response has been very individual, and I think in regards to power, and even more particularly life right now, right, and especially over the past year, 2 years with the global pandemic, has been an extreme awakening for many of us, I think, but I can definitely speak to it, of just the power of circumstances outside of many of my individual control, and learning to recognize what is and is not in my power, and to release trying to control or figure out everything. And I think that even loops back to notions of spirit that you were speaking about, and this existence, and having, bring a new word into the mix, right, around having faith and relying on relations, deep, long-standing and meaningful relations for that support and for gaining trust and insight and recommendations at times when my knowing or sense of power and grounding maybe is more unstable than I have previously experienced.
Wow. A follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
Those notions of power that you have, what is the presence that holds those notions of power?
Presence, I think it just reminds me of what you were speaking about. And I think these questions, this one in particular, right, gets at this deeper sense of knowing or trying to release. It's been an ongoing journey for me, and I am hopeful that this proven sustainable work helps facilitate others to, with letting go a little bit of being so in here. and when I don't know right away, when I don't know how to solve all the problems, or I don't have that a total conflated sense of power that I may have experienced in the past and felt comfortable with, then it comes to trying to get out of that. My default mode is here, and it's been a big journey for me, and continuing to learn more and more how important it is to go to here, and even throughout down into the ground, into feeling our surroundings and grounding in nature. And so I'd say these essence and these various experiences with power naturally, no, not naturally, societally have been in my head, and I've learned, and my default is to be in my head, but have really recognized the importance of trying to tune into other parts of my body and knowing, and be able to relate to people from those deeper parts, and ground in and raise my awareness of even beyond my body, the physical surroundings around me, and the broader systems and environments that we're all a part of.
Your answer was perfect. And it was perfect in this regard. I didn't pay attention to anything that you said. I was totally listening to the sound of your voice and the way that your body was moving. That's the rhythm, and that is the soundscape. That is a rhythm and the soundscape that I absolutely recognize. And so I'm really pleased and honored to be able to work with you. Someone who is so thoughtful and so conscious of being thoughtful. Because there are a lot of people who are thoughtful, but they're not particularly conscious of being thoughtful. And there are a lot of people who are conscious, but they're not particularly thoughtful about being conscious. You're both. And that's rare. Among young people, that's really rare. And so I salute you. And Sox?
Well, I just want to say, I think we're moving toward closing. I name this collective the three of us, as one of the foundations that really provide an opportunity for me to go forward. I began my work life at 15 as a lifeguard on the New Jersey shore. Ketu's been with me there. And most of the time it was the easiest job around, but every once in a while, things would get wild and woolly. The ocean would get in a place letting us humans know that we were not in charge, then, now, or in the future. And one of the things that's helpful when you're a lifeguard is to have this little buoy that you carry with you on a rope that tethers you to shore, and that you can hand to somebody who's freaking out and wants to just grab you and go down. And that buoy is what helps people survive, lifeguard and terrified swimmer, former swimmer, to make it back to solid ground. And I say that in the context of this collective, that you are my buoy and you are my life rope. And I like how slow it goes. You can't rush conversation. And if I learn anything from Proven Sustainable, Proven Free, it's that staying alive and understanding my relationship with the living world is not about going fast. Thank you both for this time we've been together. Ketu, back to you.
Are there any questions from anyone that we have as a wrap up for this conversation? Anything that has not been mentioned that you feel needs to be mentioned, or question that has not been questioned?
I, for one, know that I could stay on with you two for 4 more hours, and there was more stuff thereafter. So I'm standing on the beach right now after a refreshing swim and surf, and for me, that's enough, I think. Kelsey?
Yeah, no, my mind's in a space actually. So I've started surfing and bodyboarding too. So Sox's analogy is very dear to my heart right now, and the experiences I've had recently. So yeah, my mind kind of went to some of that as well on the beach in the water, looking out at it right now from where I am as well. But yes, I'm really looking forward to more conversations and bringing others into this and learning and hearing from them. And I think, it's important to recognize when to pause and when to stop now and then. So I think it's great also that this collective is aware of that and the natural flow and things.
Yeah, I think that organic is the watchword for me. And I think that, no, let me back that up. I know that going forward, we will be mindful of one another and mindful of the people who enter the circle with us. And that we'll be guided by that. So I want to thank you both for this time and for the deep food that I've received this morning. Peace, respect, gratitude, and love.